From the wonderful world of sports, we bring you Home Run Derby.
This week we have two of the greatest stars in all of baseball. That fence-busting switch hitter, Mickey Mantle, and the wondrous say-hey kid, Willie Mays.
Good luck. Good luck, Mickey.
Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays were linked together during the 1950s in through the 1970s as two of the greatest baseball players ever. They frequently appeared together on TV shows, magazines, baseball cards, endorsed products together, and were even in commercials.
Everything's better with Blue Bonnet on it. Great.
For a time, their baseball cards were valued at similar levels too. The first Beckett Price Guide in 1979 lists the value of their mint cards within $1 of each other. Every year from 1956 to 1969, Mantle's last year. It seems that in the past, society viewed Mantle and Mays as similar and equal, but not today. Let's take a look at the current value of their 1960 to 1969 baseball cards. For consistency's sake, I'm going to look at cards that have been professionally graded by professional sports authenticators. PSA is the leading grading service in the baseball card hobby. They will examine a card and give it a number grade between 1 and 10, with 10 being the highest quality. It allows us to compare apples to apples when looking at vintage baseball cards. Here I use the PSA's online price guide for Mantle and Mays cards graded 7, 8, or 9. I couldn't find one instance where a Willie Mays card is worth more than a Mantle card of the same year and grade. More often than not, Mantle cards are worth exponentially more than similar Mays cards. For example, let's take a look at cards graded PSA 8. An 8 is considered a collector grade card. Here we find some variation in how much more Mantle cards are worth, yet Mantle cards are always worth more than Mays cards. The 1962 Mantle is only worth 1.3 times what the Mays card is, but the 1969 card is worth 8.5 times as much. Those extremes aside, if you average out the differences in values of PSA cards between 1960 and 1969, you find that Mantle's cards are worth an average of 5 times what a comparable Mays card is worth. Now you could argue whether Mantle or Mays was a better ball player, but you can't argue that Mickey Mantle was 5 times the player that Willie Mays was. But that's how the cards are valued.
What I want you to do is go out there. I'm going to give you some mitts and a ball, and just kind of play, just play catch.
The question is, can we still catch? I'm not sure. Does it have to be overhand? Last time we played catch was 29 years ago. Long time ago.
The careers of Joe Morgan and Johnny Bench overlapped. They were teammates, friends, world champions, and each was league MVP twice. They arguably defined their positions when they played. Yet there is a stark difference in the value of their cards. Here I looked at PSA's auction prices realized page to determine what collectors are paying for these cards in 2018. For grades PSA 7, 8, or 9, Bench's 1968 rookie card is worth about 50% more than Joe Morgan's 1965 rookie card. Now let's take a broader look at a 7-year period at top sets between 1969 and 1975. Looking at the PSA online price guide, you can easily develop a list of the top 10 most valuable cards for each set. If we look at which players show up in the top 10 list each year, Johnny Bench's card in PSA 8 grade are in the top 10 list for 5 out of those 7 years. Joe Morgan's card only appears in the top 10 list once in 7 years in the 1973 set, and that's because of a low population count. Population count is the number of cards in circulation for that particular grade. Now let's take a look at Nolan Ryan and Reggie Jackson. Again, two of the most outstanding players of the 1970s. Their careers span most of the same years. Nolan Ryan's 1968 rookie card is worth about twice what the 1969 Reggie Jackson rookie card is, even in the same condition. Now let's take a look again at PSA cards from top sets, this time between 1970 and 1975. Here, I'm going to exclude rookie cards because they are usually worth much more than any other card in the set. If we take the rookie cards out, Ryan's card is the number 1 or 2 most valuable card in the entire set, 5 out of those 6 years between 1970 and 1975. Now, in those same years, Reggie Jackson's cards don't even place in the top 5 of the most valuable card list in those sets 4 years out of 6. If we control for the year of the card and the grade, PSA 8, cards of Nolan Ryan will sell for between 2 and 5 times as much as Reggie Jackson cards for every year except 1971. Jackson's 1971 card is more than 3.5 times rarer than Ryan's in a PSA 8 grade. What about Ryan and one of the greatest ball players ever, Hank Aaron? The same pattern holds here. If you look at their Topps cards between 1969 and 1975, in 6 of those 7 years, Ryan's PSA 8 graded cards are worth more than Aaron's. There are 4 years where Ryan's cards are worth twice as much as Aaron's. Our immediate explanation for the disparity in value might be that the cards of the white players are scarcer than black players. We can test this theory by using the PSA's very detailed population reports. First, a quick explanation for how we look at scarcity. In the baseball card hobby, scarcity is called POP, which means population. Professional Sports Authenticators publishes a population report that tells you exactly how many cards have been given a particular number grade. For example, there are 627 1974 Topps Hank Aaron cards in PSA 8 grade. Therefore, its POP is 627. POP doesn't tell us how many cards were printed a particular year. It only tells us how many cards collectors submitted for grading. Many baseball card collectors believe that POP is a big factor in determining a card's value. Let's test this with Nolan Ryan and Hank Aaron cards. The 1969, 70, and 71 Nolan Ryan cards in PSA 8 are worth twice what Hank Aaron's cards are worth. If you believe that POP determines a card's value, then you would expect that Nolan Ryan's cards were scarcer or had a lower POP during those years. But clearly this isn't true. Nolan Ryan's cards in PSA 8 for those 3 years actually have a higher POP count than Hank Aaron's. Hank Aaron's cards are scarcer, yet worth half as much. What's particularly interesting here is that Ryan's 1970 card, number 712 in a set of 720 cards, is considered to be a high number card. Before 1974, Topps would release their cards in stages or series rather than sell them all at once. The very last cards in the set were released around football season when the demand was lower. Conventional wisdom in the baseball card hobby is that less of these high number cards were sold. Even with this presumed rarity, the 1970 Nolan Ryan card still has a higher POP than the 1970 Hank Aaron in grades PSA 7, 8, or 9. Let's return to the Mantle and Mays cards. The biggest variation in value is in 1969 when Mantle's card is 8.5 times as valuable as Mays. This is the more common yellow lettering Mantle card. If we look at the POP report though, we see that there are actually slightly fewer Mays cards. Another year with a big difference in value are the 1965 cards. Mantle's 7 times as valuable. The POP reports do show that yes, there are less Mantle cards, but the difference is 10%. A 10% difference does not equal a 700% variation. POP doesn't seem to play a causal role in explaining why the baseball cards of white players are worth more. We often see that the most valuable cards have a high POP count. Why is this? The more valuable a card, the more it causes collectors to seek these cards out and submit them for grading. An extreme example of this are the rookie cards of George Brett, Mike Schmidt, and Robin Yount. All of these cards have very high POP counts, yet the value of these cards remains high. But a low POP can elevate the value of a black player's card. When the POP count is especially low, less than 200, the value of the card does rise. And this is where we see the exception, the rare instance when a black player's card is worth more than the card of a comparable white player. We saw that with the 1973 Joe Morgan, 1974 Hank Aaron, and the 1971 Reggie Jackson. There are other examples as well. If anything, POP doesn't explain the racial disparity in card values, but a low POP for the cards of black players can reduce this difference. So what's going on here? We've seen that there is a big difference in vintage baseball card values between comparable Hall of Fame players that are white and those that are black. We know it's not because the white players were exponentially better players. We know that it's not because the cards of white players are scarcer. So why is it that the vintage baseball cards of white players are worth more than the cards of black players? In doing research for this project, I came across an interesting quote from an interview Pete Rose gave Playboy magazine in 1979. "Look, if you owned Swanson's Pizza, would you want a black guy to do the commercial on TV for you? Would you want Dave Parker selling your pizza to America for you? Or would you want Pete Rose?" As despicable as Rose's comments are, they show how black athletes of that era were devalued relative to white baseball players. Yes, black athletes did do television commercials. Hell, Joe Morgan even appeared in one with Pete Rose the same year he made that comment.
There's something about an aqua velvet.
But it's hard to argue that black baseball players got the same treatment white players got, whether it was through salary, commercial endorsements, TV appearances, press coverage, or any other barometer of success. Black athletes were not seen as equal by white society. But wait a minute, you say, didn't I start this video by arguing that at one time society saw Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle as equals? I did say that, but now I'm not sure I truly believe it. I think publicly we wanted to think that yes, Mantle and Mays were equal, but I question whether privately most of white society really believed it. I'm left struggling with which version of American society is more accurate, the Bluebonnet commercial or Pete Rose's. I think Rose offers us the best answer for why the values of vintage baseball cards of black and white Hall of Fame players are so different. With black athletes devalued relative to white players, it makes sense that a largely white fan base would follow those white ball players more closely. This happened over many generations. Today, those young fans of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s are the ones buying vintage baseball cards. Their choices drive up the value of some of these cards, like Mantle and Ryan, into the stratosphere. Is it reasonable to think that this devaluing of black athletes from generations ago could have such a profound impact on our society that we still see its effects today in something as trivial as the value of vintage baseball cards?